Hello, everybody. On behalf of the conference board, a very, very warm welcome to our viewers from Asia, Europe, and Latin America. Thanks very much for joining us today. My name is Sandhya Karpe, and I'm the head of Human Capital Research Asia for the conference board. And I will be your host for the session today. And along with me, I have two wonderful guests who I will introduce to you in a bit. So just a little bit of a backdrop for the session today, which is on the talent agility imperative. As you know, our worlds have turned topsy-turvy since February, and we seem to be in a constant state of white water. And there is no definitive outlook on when we might reach steady state. And in fact, we don't even know if such a thing will ever exist again. So we are very challenged right now with working within the context of this VUCA world, while at the same time focusing on the important and the critical aspect of employee well-being. And I know that's a very, very tight rope walk for all of us. However, in the midst of the chaos and challenges, there are many exciting opportunities which are also emerging. And it's really heartening to see how the HR community globally has risen to the occasion and to drive experiments and lead changes within their organizations. So today's webcast shines a spotlight on the talent management function in particular that needs to undergo a radical redefinition. We'll examine some challenges that are faced managing our talent for today and the future. We'll share some interesting examples and experiences that we have gleaned from our networks at the conference board, and we will get insights from our two wonderful guests. So before we start, I want to just give you a little bit of housekeeping tips. So first of all, ask questions. We want this to be engaging. We want this to be valuable for you. We just have 1 hour together, but let's make the most of it. Please use the chat box. We will not have the opportunity to hear your voices, but we will take as many questions as we can. You have the opportunity to download the presentation via the PDF that is uploaded here, so feel free to do that. Use full screen for maximum impact, and you also have an opportunity to share the presentation with your colleagues. So with that, let's dive straight into the topic. Before that, I want to thank our partners on this initiative, the Hong Kong Institute of Human Resources Management, a great organization based out of Hong Kong, focuses on development of HR leaders and more than 5,300 members. And I know many of you are on the call with us today, so welcome. We will very quickly run through our topic for today, and which is based on the insights from our recent publication from the conference board, but there's been a lot of water under the bridge since then, so we're going to add some new dimensions to the discussion, and we will follow this up very quickly. So we'll just spend 15-20 minutes where I'll present this paper to you, and we'll follow this up with a great discussion with our guest speakers, and right after that we will open this up for questions. So I have the pleasure of introducing you to two wonderful individuals who are joining the conversation with us today. So we have Leslie Hayward, who is the Vice President HR of Royal Dutch Shell, based here in Singapore, a veteran, both our guests, veteran HR professionals and practitioners, done some amazing work in their organizations. Leslie has been with Shell for 30 years, and he's done some outstanding work across the region. Gurpreet Grewal represents Generali, which you probably know is a leading insurance company based out of Italy. And Gurpreet has had a long and illustrious career in the financial services sector. So she really understands the space very deeply and is now working very deeply and broadly in HR to lead some interesting experiments that she's going to share with us later. So welcome, Leslie and Gurpreet, and thank you very much for joining us and sharing your insights today. Okay, let me proceed here. And before we get into the highlights from our paper, I just wanted to set the macro context, which is emerging. I know that many of us are really immersed in the whole COVID story, as we should be, and that has really put, has clouded, I think, in the way in which, we look at the future. And it is the lens through which we are now seeing the world. And, that's because it has been so consuming. However, I also want to point out that there are two other macro contextual factors that we must take into account as leaders of HR and talent. The first is geopolitical tensions that are increasing, and Asia Pacific and Asia in general are going to be specifically impacted by this, and more specifically the US-China trade war, which could have implications for multinational organizations, especially American ones, which are operating in China, depending on talent for China, exporting talent to China, etc. And the third is the rise of nationalism, which is a trend that we've seen over the years in the US, in Europe, and also in Asia, including countries like India, but now more pronounced by the fact that unemployment rates have gone up, and we are seeing again the return of protectionism of jobs, etc. So, given this backdrop, what does all this mean for the whole space of talent management and talent mobility is something that we are going to do a deep dive into. So I'd like to get first into the overview of the paper. I hope that you all have received this paper, have had a chance to look at it. If you've not, please feel free to reach out to us and we'd be very happy to share it. I just want to mention that we don't profess to have any silver bullets. Everybody is muddling through this, and so are we at the conference board. And what we have put together here is based on our observations of what companies are doing, how they are approaching talent management in this very complex and ambiguous context, and what are some of the things for HR leaders and talent leaders to keep in mind. So I'm going to start going around this wheel clockwise, starting with the purple box on the top. So let me start with courageous experiments. So on the one hand, we are hearing that companies, according to the Mercer study, almost a third of companies in Asia have put the brakes on hiring. Okay, so many companies are not hiring. Some have promised no layoffs. Others have also said they are going to not have any movement of talent, no restructuring, and no mobility internally. However, we are also seeing another band of courageous organizations that are using this opportunity to drive some very courageous talent experiments. We were talking to the CEO of Citibank Singapore recently, who said that he moved an entire group of people literally overnight to his teleservices unit because it had suddenly experienced an explosion in demand. Okay, so within 2 weeks, they put together an accelerated training program and they have moved all these people over. Now, he said he was initially apprehensive about how people would react, but to his pleasant surprise, people actually raised their hands and they had more volunteers than they needed. So we also saw this, our conference board colleagues in the US initiated research with a national retailer, and they found similar results where people very willingly moved to these new jobs without even being fully equipped with the capabilities to start with, very willing to be trained, very willing to step up to support the business at this time. And these people did not even expect, compensation additionally for this change. So it's really important to think about, what kind of experiments, one can really conduct to support the business as the needs, emergent needs appear, right, through internal talent mobility. And if you can find a great intersection between these challenges and people's career aspirations, that's absolutely a win-win. People are willing to step up. They do understand that their destinies are tied very closely with the future of the organization. So, that could be a good opportunity for you to also stretch your talent in a way. But what the caveat there being that if the jobs are really over people's heads and they're not set up to succeed, that could actually be counterproductive, or it could lead to demoralization. So the cost and benefit is something that you have to look at. The second thing is responding to in an agile way to business demands. And what we are finding is some businesses are having very radical fluctuations in demand, where we talked to the president of HP, the computer manufacturer in Asia, TC, and he told TC, and he told us that he's experiencing what he calls volcanic hotspots, and they're emerging in certain areas and they're cooling off, and then hotspots are emerging elsewhere. So how do you deal with these kind of peaks and troughs in talent? And that's an interesting question I'd like to pose later to my guests as well. But what TC said was very interesting. He drew the analogy from football, and he said that I need midfielders and I need strikers and I need goalkeepers on the team. And sometimes I need my midfielders to play the goalkeeper role, even though they've not signed up for that, or they are not trained to be goalkeepers. But they need to be willing and have the mindset of being able to move, and we would provide them with the opportunity to develop, at least to get them 75% there. And even if there's a gap of 25%, we are okay with that. But we would rather give those opportunities to our internal folks. And there could be an opportunity in the very short term for them to move right back, or maybe not. And they need to be, embrace that kind of ambiguity and that uncertainty. And that's the sort of mindset we're looking for in our people. So this sort of internal mobility shifts, is something that companies are experimenting with as well. The third thing I want to talk about is your talent assessment metrics. Folks, they always say that a crisis is what makes leaders, right? And there's no opportune time than this to really observe your high potentials in action. So whatever talent assessment frameworks you have, this is really a time to see how people are delivering in times of a crisis. And what we are hearing from our partners is there are some high potentials who've really stepped up as expected, and there are many folks who have not delivered and who have actually disappointed. And the question becomes, what does that mean? Are your assessment metrics robust enough? Are they measuring the right things, or do you need to take a relook at these? And with this, I want to introduce you to a nice framework that I like to look at and refer to from Corn Ferry, which talks about future leaders, and they describe them as being self-disruptive leaders. Self-disruptive leaders have characteristics like having a growth mindset. They are raising their hand for new challenges, without having full comfort with or having all the capabilities, willing to be trained. And more importantly, they are people leaders. They are willing to take people along. They are people developers. So this is sort of, the kind of capabilities that Corn Ferry says that leaders of the future are going to need, especially, those who are navigating tough situations like this. So that's the other question. Nurturing top talent. So folks, don't take your top talent for granted at this time. People are going through difficult situations. Okay, I think I missed one, but I'll come back to it later. So hold your top talent close. There is a lot of demand for talent in certain areas like digital, like analytics. So at least your high performers in those areas, remember that they have great opportunities outside. The other thing I want to say is work from home is tough for a lot of people. Okay, people are really having a tough time balancing work and life, especially true for women in Asia, where we know that there is a history of gender imbalance when it comes to unpaid work. So, women are bearing the brunt of most of the household work, and therefore for them juggling this ball is hard. So you could end up having a leaky pipeline with your women talent at this stage. So please keep your women leaders and your women high potentials also very close, and make sure that you are proactively addressing the challenges. The green box that I missed was about future forward capabilities. So on the one hand, while we are talking about, business as usual, making sure we are filling the gaps and replacing people and all of that, it's really important to focus on, alongside parallel track, what are the needs of the future? And I'm sure at a strategy level, your company is pivoting in new directions, new markets, new products, new business models, and all of that has implications for talent, right? And you may not have that talent today, but how can you acquire now for the future? So while some of you I know have hit the brakes on acquisition, it may be smart to also parallel track hiring for the future. Now, the latest McKinsey report talks about two areas that are really exploding right now in terms of talent acquisition is digital and analytics and consumer insights. And that's because consumer behavior is changing. We don't know whether people are going to go to malls anymore. We don't know how many people are going to fly in planes, or how many people are going to use hotels, or use, we heard that in the beauty care industry, cosmetic sales have dropped considerably. The only thing that's selling really great now is eye makeup, because, everybody's in front of a camera. So, those are the kind of new things that are happening. And what does that mean for your talent capabilities? And are you planning for that now? The McKinsey study says that the world has moved 5 years forward in digital adoption, both individually and businesses, in the last 4 months. That has been the pace of digital adoption. So think about the talent that you need to accelerate. And this is cross-industry and cross-function. Every single industry is accelerating digitalization. So digital natives, folks, And the digi folks are very, very much in demand right now. Okay, and they are actually at a premium. So this is a good time to acquire those people. The caveat I would say is, remember, they come with a very different DNA. So if you are a traditional bricks and mortar organization, integrating this kind of talent creates a little bit of a culture clash that you need to manage as an HR leader, because the attrition rate, the research indicates, and this is pre-COVID, by the way. Now maybe people don't have job options, so they will stick with you. But before COVID, the attrition rate among this population of highly tech and highly digital people was, people would leave in even 6 months into the job because they were disillusioned with the culture. They were not able to, they were not integrated, others were not embracing them, etc., etc. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind. And then finally, this whole aspect of embracing tech. So as you know, HR tech is exploding. Intuitively, you know, we don't like to hire people unless we can meet them in person. Folks, there's got to be a big mindset shift, okay, in our own ways of thinking, and we need to really break out of our own molds. So that's really important. You can't wait to meet people in person to hire them anymore. So there's a lot of work going on right now. We talked to the head of HR, Amanda Gervais of MasterCard in Asia, and she talked about some great experiments they are doing on virtual onboarding. They have run virtual internships for more than 500 summer interns. They are doing virtual talent assessments. So there's all kinds of technology that's now available to enable you to deliver your talent processes and systems without sort of the disruption that unless you feel that you absolutely need to wait. Okay, so this is broadly the insights from our paper. Now I want to just add another layer of complexity, or as if our world was not already complex, which is the whole aspect of immobility, not talent mobility, but talent immobility, right? So as you know, with all the contextual factors that I shared, visa restrictions, immigration, border controls, just people fearful of leaving their homes and going to another country, the whole aspect of global mobility is going to be challenged. And therefore, for multinational companies especially, which pride themselves on having a very rich and diverse global talent pool, where the tour of duty to climb the ladder career progression is to have that one stint at the head office, when they focus on global assignments as a way to develop their talent, and now with all these constraints, how are we going to address this challenge of global mobility? Is it going to have an impact on our access to a global talent pool? Is it going to impact diversity because we are now only going to be able to hire people locally? How are we going to stretch our talent? How are we going to give them that cross-cultural exposure? These are all the difficult questions that are coming up and that I'm going to address to my wonderful guests, because I get to toss the difficult questions over to them. Okay, and then finally, I want to say one thing. I want to share this chart with you. This is very interesting. World Economic Forum comes up every year with the World Competitiveness Index, where it ranks countries by competitiveness. And the big, some of the dimensions that are taken into account, it's done by IMD, the well-known business school in Switzerland. One of the things that they look at is innovation coming out of these countries, entrepreneurship coming out of these countries. And if you look at this chart, and Thailand is of course 21, but if you look at the top 10 countries today, 6 out of these 10 countries, Singapore, Switzerland, Hong Kong, Canada, UAE, and US, depend very heavily on global talent, okay, for their own models of growth. So the question becomes, what is this going to do to competitiveness? The jury is out, by the way, in research about how physical proximity impacts creativity. And there is very strong research to indicate that physical proximity actually contributes to higher creativity. So when you're going to have these virtual teams and people not being able to collaborate in a physical space, what is that going to do to creative networks and to the outcomes? So there's a lot of complex sort of outcomes or second order effects of all these things that are happening that we'd like to chat about later. And finally, the big question, which we just for you to think about, is HR ready? Okay, and all of these changes and this shift in mindset and driving change is going to require a mindset shift in our own heads. It's going to require a capability set that HR needs to have, different from what we had before. And my question is, do we feel ready? And this is coming out of our conversations with many of our partners is, and from it, not just from business leaders, but also from HR leaders themselves who are introspecting honestly and saying, we don't think we have all these capabilities that we need, and or our teams don't have them, and how are we going to build those up? Okay, so folks, this is the insights from our side, and now I am going to open this up to a discussion with our guests today. So thank you once again, Leslie and Gurpreet, for coming over and chatting with us. So I want to start. We'll take about 20 minutes for questions with you, and then we will look at the chat. We already have some interesting questions coming up. Okay. So the first question for you is, we talked about experimentation. Tell us about what Shell and Generali are doing by way of experimentation around talent. Are there some bold moves that you have made? So Gurpreet, shall I ask you to go first, please?
Yeah, I think can you hear me? Because I think my visual is frozen. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah. The voice is fine. Carry on.
Great. Thank you. So I think thank you, Sandhya, for this opportunity and for me to share what we have been doing in Generali. The way some of the courageous, may I use that word, opportunities that we are looking at is really looking at how we can take first a step back and say, how are we really looking at our talent? So I think as an organization, we are looking at whether the definition of talent in the old way of working is exactly what we need going forward, because the new normal, I hate using that word, but the new normal is going to be different. So there is a lot of work that is going on right now to see that how do we redefine how we identify talent. The other aspect, which is very critical for running the business right now, is how do we make sure that we keep our talent engaged and we can use the skill sets that we have actually dotted all over Asia, which we had always depended on using in different countries, because we are very intertwined together, and we have certain skill sets in one country that support another country. So a bit of a hub and spoke model. So we then moved on to what we are trying, the virtual STAs and virtual cross-functional teams to really work on projects for countries, because we've realized that we can't stop. You can't stop, right? You have to carry on working, carry on delivering product development. So, digitalization, that is absolutely critical for the insurance industry. So if we follow that philosophy of not stopping, the only way that we could carry forward is to go ahead and create virtual teams and just work as if we were sitting across the table. And we've noticed that MS Teams actually is working very well for us. So just that's one of the, we've taken a leap of faith, and and I think the results over the last few months has been pretty positive.
Thank you, Gurpreet. So this virtual STA is something new that you have just initiated as a result of the changing context. So good to hear that that's working well for you. Leslie, how about Shell? What is one bold experiment that you'd like to share with us that Shell is doing?
Good afternoon, Sandy, and thank you for inviting me as well for this session this afternoon. Maybe a slightly different angle from the sharing from Gurpreet on this one. So Shell HR function has been going through a transformation in the last couple of years. And one of the aspects of the transformation is the push for digitalization. And here we have a new toy within the organization to play. And there is an opportunity for us to look at how we can leverage the power of a cloud-based IT platform to drive skill management in the organization. So what we are in the midst of doing, I know you asked for an experiment, but I can't share the outcome of this experiment yet, just now, but at least we are very bullish in what we're trying to do and using this IT platform. So essentially what it is to baseline the current capability or the skills that we have in the organization. And once you have that baseline, the intent is then to understand what your current capability are, with a view to see how you can use that to upskill or reskill your workforce to make them future ready. So this is using automation and the drive of IT technology to make us more nimble and more agile in how we can prepare the organization. So we are doing that just now, and like I said, I can't share with you the results just now, but it's a big exercise. We have about 80,000 employees globally in Shell, and try to baseline the skills of all our employees. It's going to be an effort that will take a few years, but I think it's something that is imperative that we must do to make our organization more ready for the onslaught of what the future is going to bring us.
Thank you. Thanks, Leslie. That's fascinating, the two examples that you both shared. I want to pick up on your point about future readiness, which really leads into my next question, and that is about leadership. As we have seen, this crisis has really challenged leaders in many different ways, and it's so novel that we couldn't have prepared our leaders enough for it. So, as you look at your, talent pool overall, what did you observe in terms of, people's ability, willingness to step up at this time? Have you had the need to take a relook at your assessment metrics? And what kind of leaders do you think Generali and Shell need to develop in the future based on what you're seeing now?
Yeah. I think for me, if I may use your word, which is really the future forward capabilities, what's coming across very strong for me is flexibility and adaptability. That is absolutely key, I think, going forward, because we can talk about 3-year plans, 4-year plans, but the road to achieve that 3-year plan is going to go through many detours. And we need to have leaders who can actually move pretty quickly and adapt to that detour and make sure we achieve the final goal. And more importantly, we need leaders who can carry the teams with them in a virtual way. So I think the emotional intelligence is now going to start playing an even bigger role than what it has in the past. We cannot work in a directive, hierarchical fashion anymore. So we need courageous leaders who are collaborative, who are sensitive to their teams, who have the confidence of allowing them to create a mistake, create an environment that allows you to make a mistake. You need to have that now. You do not have the luxury of everyone sitting around being very clear. And one of the most important ones for me is you need someone who is inclusive. As we go cross-geographical, as we go virtual, we all don't speak in the same accent. We don't have the same background. We need to be able to, we all don't speak, loudly. Some people are introverts. How do you actually make sure that you continue with team dynamics that is inclusive? And so that you can get the best from your team. And I think this is a tall order. It needs a lot of change management, I feel, from the leaders. And I think HR has a big role to help create leaders with this aspect, being a coach and a mentor, and still sometimes taking difficult decisions because you have to reach the goalpost.
So, Gurpreet, just one follow-up to what you mentioned. A lot of what you said is around risk-taking, about being willing to make mistakes and then pick yourself up and move forward. How does that work in the context of conventionally risk-averse industry like yours, insurance, which is all about managing risk, right? So how do you sort of build that mindset? Because they do say that the industry you work in also influences your mindset. So what are your thoughts about that? I mean, it must be a much more tougher task for you than people in other industries.
I would disagree with that, Sandhya, because over the last few years, we've actually seen insurance go through a lot of disruption. So we of course have our risk teams that are always trying to pull us back, but then you have the business guys. And you can see an increasing role of digitalization that's going on in our industries across the countries, where you need to be moving fast, having customer insights, not only responding but almost predicting customer behaviors, to come up with products, to become an advisor instead of a seller through an agent. So the insurance industry has gone through an amazing amount of transformation in the last few years. So interestingly, when we had to sit and work from home across Asia, it has not been such a challenge. We could make that move because people have already started thinking differently. And we are also lucky because in Asia, I call ourselves the world's oldest startup, because we still have a startup mentality. We're pretty disorganized, but we have the backing of a major giant behind us. So I think it's a very interesting position that we are in, but I think the insurance industry cannot call itself traditional any longer because the disruption in this industry has been huge and the business guys are feeling it and have been responding to it quite actively.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So Leslie, the same question to you is about these future forward capabilities. And an additional question which links to what I asked Gurpreet, more specific to your industry is, Shell is a large corporation, as you said, 80,000 employees. How do you teach the elephant to dance, right? I mean, when you talk about agility, it's much easier when you're smaller. So how do you manage that, in terms of agile mindsets?
Yeah, one of the common analogy that they use in our industry, Sandhya, is imagine having to turn a giant tanker around. The answer to that is we do it very slowly. But that's also something that we're very happy with, and I think the world and the whole environment that we're in today does require us to do that a lot quicker, and I think that's what we're doing. I think in response to your question about this future forward capability with regards to leaders, one of the things that we've been very uneasy about in Shell, and I guess this place is about quite predominantly in the oil and gas industry, is safety and how we perform in the safety area. So, in the last few years, although there's been lots of effort being put in to drive safety and safety leadership, we were just simply not happy with the results that we're seeing in terms of, near serious incidents and fatality cases that we've got, to the extent that we've seen that the results are plateauing. So it's not improving, it's simply plateauing. So there was a bit of a call for action. And HR was looked at and called upon to see what we can do to drive safety leadership. And more broadly, how do we look at the whole leadership framework that we have in Shell? So we did that, and that was pre-COVID, and I'll explain why I made that distinction. But one of the aspect or the lever that we looked at as we refresh the leadership framework is around the leader's mindset. How do we drive leader's mindset in order to allow for psychological safety? And I think, Gurpreet, you made reference to some aspect of that. And, this is about how we push leaders to be able to be agile, to respond quickly to demand of customers, to be naturally curious, and more fundamentally, to also be able to display humility and to be able to demonstrate that, despite being a leader, I still have a lot to learn. And when you go down to the grassroots or you go down to the workshop, that demonstration, that humility, it is our hope that it will then create this whole culture of psychological safety that people are willing to speak up. Because it is so important for leaders to understand what the troops are going through on a day-to-day basis in order for us to be able to address some of the risks, the safety risks that they go through. Because, they are the expert, they are the one that deals with it. And more often than not, the answer also sits with them. They are the one that has, the suggestion of how we deal with it. And I made that distinction with COVID earlier was because, we as we were launching this, we decided to take a pause and say, is this the right time with the pandemic and what have you? Not saying that we're saying safety is of lesser importance, but to be able to bring it alive in relation to the challenges that we're facing today makes this COVID quite unique in terms of how we want to launch this. So, and we call it the use case as opposed to a case study. We call it use case, bringing the reality of the environment that you're in today to launch this whole learner's mindset. And that's what we're going through right now. And that's all around driving, safety leadership, as I've mentioned, where you can do it to the extent that you can do it, leaders that are still facing the front line and what have you. But more importantly, I think what we call or demand of our leaders today is the ability to demonstrate care and well-being, be able to constantly engage your troops and your workforce. And that's a very different call under normal times, because here, 60-70% of our workforce are working from home or remotely, and there's no, the usual cadence and what have you. So it does demand different skill sets from our leaders in order to be able to still demonstrate that care and the well-being to our people. And of course, equally important to the whole mix of the equation is leaders are expected to keep the business running. We have shareholders that we still need to make happy and make sure that we still meet the expectation of what we're supposed to deliver per our business plan. So in summary, it's a learner's mindset, although the original thinking was behind how we want to push for safety leadership, but we've turned that around to say, let's take advantage of this COVID-19 situation. How do we make leaders show up to make them look like, they are still able to learn, they're willing to learn, they want to engage with the troops, and the sense of that humility to
Thank
create
you.
that culture
Thanks,
of
Leslie
psychological
and Gurpreet.
safety within the
For those insights. I want to shift gears a little bit to the new emerging challenge, which is of restricted global mobility. And both of you represent multinational companies which have presence all over the world and have been relying, heavily on creating a diverse and global talent pool. Tell me, just in the light of the COVID restrictions, mobility restrictions, the trade war that seems to be looming, and also governments tightening up on visas, immigration, etc. Where do you
Thanks,
see the
Sandhya. This is
future now of mobility, talent mobility, and what kind of challenges do you think multinationals are going to
Thanks,
face?
Sandhya.
And
This is a
how
tough.
are you all thinking about this in your
We
organization?
are clearly
Gurpreet, do you want to go
global
first?
mobility has been one of the key
Before you,
pillars for us to grow our leadership teams. It's a critical part of our
sorry,
leadership
before you
development
start, folks,
program
please
globally.
start typing your questions, if
And
any, for the
given the
speakers.
fact
We
that
will take
right
them
now
as we
we
are
are
speaking,
unable
okay?
to
Thank you.
move
Gurpreet.
people, it's going to become increasingly difficult even in the future. One aspect that we are really working on is, of course, the virtual STAs, as I mentioned before, is helping out to meet the skill gap that we have, especially for projects. So it's becoming a bit of a project-based approach, as opposed to moving leaders across continents, and for us in Asia, for them to be embedding the Generali DNA into the region, and also having a cross-fertilization of ideas. And so that's all really now missing. We are trying to work through cross-geographical and functional projects. But given the fact that, again, coming from different cultures, different time zones, we are seeing this as a challenge. And I think the concern that we have is that are we going to go back to being, again, geographically operated entities, where only maybe a few senior people move at senior leadership positions, because the organization kind of almost, we don't have a choice. So we have to maybe hire a CEO or a risk officer from another country. Have we arrived at a solution yet? I cannot comment on that. We are still struggling with this. The best that we are trying to do is run centers of excellence, and for a country, for a company that has been traditionally very federated, what I am seeing now is a more functional alignment. So the communities of specific skill sets have started forming. And there is a lot more exchange of information, ideas, identification of issues, finding joint solutions, virtually sitting together across a virtual table. We are seeing a lot more of that happening. Is that going to impact our organization structures? Maybe. But that is an interesting observation that I've noticed in the last 4 months. There's been no formal change of org structures, but I'm just seeing the functional alignments becoming quite strong.
Okay. Leslie, your comments on this big challenge, as Gurpreet said, it's a tough one to crack.
Yeah, I think similar challenge here. I mean, Shell in the in sharing the context, we have about 4,000 to 5,000 expatriates, so that makes about slightly about 5% thereabouts of our overall population. And it has been our legacy having expatriates, and also the nature of our business does call for a certain degree of or certain percentage of expatriates. One can debate what is the right number. And as you go through a downturn in industry, we try to tighten it up, and then when times are good, bad behavior starts to come back in again, and people start to get a bit loose in terms of their application of expatriates. But there are three underlying reasons why we use expatriates in Shell. One is around development. Yeah, so you want to expose your staff for development, especially your emerging talent. Second is around skills transfers. So in a high-tech environment that we're in, there are times where we just don't have that local capability, and therefore we need to bring in expatriates, but with a view that they would help to do the skills transfer and drive for localization over time. And the third reason is around special projects. And I think Gurpreet made reference to that as well, when we have to build a certain structure or one-of-a-kind technology, inevitably you need to demob people and bring them to site. And do that, and therefore sometimes you do need to bring expatriates. But fundamentally, we do be.
So, hi Ramona. The question, I think this is a great question, and I could actually share a very personal example in my team. And I think what I'm noticing across is that the productivity in fact hasn't declined. Yeah. It is reaching a level where I'm actually worried about the team. What we have experienced is, and I'm saying I can speak for a lot of my colleagues across the region, is that working virtually has led to an environment where leaders and managers empower the team.
There are a lot of scrutiny been done.
Some are doing it willingly, and the others have no option.
But it's not challenging the underlying principle of why we use expatriation.
And what I'm observing in the younger population today is that they are picking up that ball of empowerment and they're running with it. The level of ownership that I am seeing in this generation.
So basically, as you both said, focus on localization, which has always been,
and I was just talking to one member today,
an initiative, a push, right? We haven't, but now that's been accelerated. But
I'm having so much fun.
Like digitalization, so that's one. And the second thing is, I think, just the redefinition, with multinational.
And it's great, but it's a bit scary.
Having the global persona as something aspirational for senior leadership. How do you sort of create that in this world? So these are all the issues that people will be muddling through as we go along. So we have a question here from Ramona, which is an interesting question around working virtually. And Ramona says, with everyone working virtually, how do you keep your talent and your workforce motivated, especially with the younger generation? What are some of the things that you all are doing to keep your folks energized?
So that's my take on this.
Provides an individual.
Thanks, Ramona, for the
I worked in 3 different countries in my career in Shell, and I thoroughly value living and experiencing a different culture. I mean, there's so much you can do through the telephone or Skype or whatever. How could you experience a culture if you don't visit the country? So I think there's something to be said around that, and I do hope that that remains, but clearly I think the numbers will be challenged because of the cost consideration. So I think it's a mixed bag. I'm trying to say. I think it will be challenged, but I think horses for courses. We need to be very purposeful in terms of how we drive expatriation and to make sure it delivers the value that we've intended for it to do in the first instance.
Yeah. 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 That's very interesting. Yeah. Very. Yeah. No, that's very interesting, your insight. And I want to just mention work from Adam Grant, a Wharton professor who I had a chance to work with in my past life, talks about, moving from FOMO to JOMO. FOMO is the fear of missing out. And now people are actually having the joy.
So I think it's, when I'm saying a successful remote work model, first of all, I'll qualify the
of
word
missing out,
successful.
and they're saying
Because,
there's so many
only
things
come
in
up
life
with
that
what
we are
we
now
are trying to do
discovering, or
differently right now, and I hope it is successful.
spending more time with
Is
family, not needing to spend the
definitely
time on
communication is playing a very, very key role.
commute and all of that.
It is
And
keeping
they're some
people
of the people are
informed.
actually finding the time that
I
they're
think the
reclaiming
need of the hour is authentic leadership.
is quite
Nobody's a
precious, and
fool.
that is re-energizing them in their
If it's be it financial results, be it some whatever restructuring that we are planning, if we are any way that
productivity
we're
and their
looking at
workplace as
liquid
well. So
workforce,
thank you,
I think
Gurpreet.
we need to take people along the journey and allow them to be aware of the bigger picture. So I think every
For that,
employee
Leslie,
sitting at
what are you
home
seeing at
needs to know how he or she is contributing to the bigger picture. Because there is no coffee corner conversation. There is no conversation where you can tap someone on the shoulder or you overhear something in an open plan office. So I think it is very important to be authentic. And I'm not talking about laptops and VPNs because that's given. I think those aspects are given. Let's now really look at how can we sustain. I'm linking it back to the previous question as well. How do we keep the people engaged and within the family of generality, right? So we are stepping up town halls, stepping up communications, sharing. Sometimes I overshare, sometimes even confidential decks with my team members. So they know that if I'm asking them for constant analysis at a certain point, they understand why I'm asking that. And they actually, as I said, millennials, they come back with 10 better ideas than what I proposed. And I think we need to take our teams along in the journey. So for me, that really is today becoming very critical, just to be authentic, whichever way you look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. That's a great point, Leslie, is the connecting with purpose and how that puts a different lens on everything. So no, that's a great point. So Leon has a related question, which is what are the things that a company needs to do differently for the successful remote working model? What are uh, operationally, what can you do? Is it technology? Is it communication? I mean, what should be prioritized here from a HR perspective?
Yeah.
Gurpreet?
Well, we did have, and it's a great
I've been
question.
asked this question many times.
We do have,
and
we've been having resilience workshops.
I really struggle to
We
answer
are
because
basically
depending who you
attacking
ask,
two
you
ways. One
always
is, of
get a
course, we're
very
setting up an
different
employee
answer.
assistance
And how
program
I
to
would
kind of
tackle
support
this is
the teams. But what we are also doing from a manager
to
perspective
ask
is
them,
encouraging managers
what
to
makes you
touch
get up
base
every
with their
morning?
employees
What about
almost
your
once
work
a
that
day.
you enjoy doing? Do you see purpose in what
And
you're doing?
almost
The
have it
bigger
up a
picture.
cascade. So,
Because
if
if you
it's
enjoy
your
and you
level
want to
below,
jump out
then, the next lot of managers should be talking to their level below.
of bed every
Just
morning
try
to do
to
what you're
be
doing,
in touch
it
with
doesn't
them as
matter
much as you can. If it's once a day is too much, then let's make it once in
whether
2
you work in
days
the
or 3
office
days,
or
but
you
at least
work
twice a
virtually.
week.
Because
Have a meeting. Put on the video cameras. Let's talk about the day. Let's do a bit of bitching and moaning about our partners. Let's whine
you
about
just
the
love
kids.
doing what you're
But let's just
doing.
continue
And I think that's
the conversation, because that's very important. And of course, the employee assistance program, etc., is
more
going on. That's
sustainable
the
to
formal
me
one, the formal approach
than
and
this
support that we're
whole
giving.
debate
But
about
the
virtual
informal support, I
working,
think
how do
the
I get
role of the
myself
manager
motivated?
today is
The
extremely
answer lies
critical. And that's why
in
my
each and every
earlier
one of
point
us.
about emotional
Some people are more
quotient being high
wired
is now
to
becoming
work better at home,
extremely, extremely.
like my wife, and I'm wired to work better when I'm around people, but just how it
Yeah,
is.
that's
But
great,
what's
Gurpreet, and we're
fundamental, I
hearing
think,
that
is if
all the
I
time,
enjoy
even from
doing what I'm
employees,
doing
is,
and I see
they'd
purpose in what
rather
I'm doing,
hear
it
what,
does work
even if
better.
there's bad news, they'd rather hear it up front and, it be presented to them in a realistic and pragmatic way than they be blindsided about it later, right? So I'm going to move to the next question, which has come from Vidyasagar Rajgopalan, and he talks about, interesting comment is that remote working has become quite romantic now. So, do you see that the future will mean a hybrid model? Leslie, let me ask you the question. Is it going to be 100% remote? I mean, is work going to work ever going to come back? Are we ever going to see an office again? Or what do you think? Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Leslie. And I think, that links to Gurpreet.